Mr. Hashimoto. We will open the floor to questions. Mr. Hashimoto will stay 30 more minutes after 2 o'clock. I would like to ask you to limit your questions to one at a time. I don't know if Mr. Shirauchi wants to make a comment, no?
すみません、これから質疑応答に移りたいと思うのでございます。市長が22になっているので、そのくらいまで残ることができると言ってくださっています。メディアの方からは1人質問1つお願いしたいと思うのでございます。その前に桜内様の方から何かコメントがあると。
1点だけ、先ほどのですね、最初の司会者の紹介の点について少しコメントいたします。その紹介の橋本市長を紹介するコメントの中で、それはセックスフェイバリーという言葉を多く使われました。これは日本政府としては強制性がないということ、その証拠がないということを言っておりますので、そのような言葉を紹介の際に使われるのはややアンフェアではないかと考えています。それからヒストリーブックスということで、新さんという方の本をご引用されておりますけれども、これはすでに捏造であるということが、いろんな証拠によって明らかにされております。この点を申し上げておきます。
I do apologize. I would like to just make a few brief comments in regard to the introduction that was given by Mr. Hashimoto. The host referred to in his introduction the words sexual slavery. And I felt that perhaps this was a little unfair to use such a term as the Japanese government has officially declared that there is no evidence that this kind of forced act occurred. The second point that I'd like to mention is that Nancy referred to a historian, Mr. Yoshimi. However, there has been multiple examples of evidence produced which show that much of what he has written is incorrect. I've just bring these 2 points to your attention.
Thank you very much. We open the floor to question. Jonathan.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Sobline from the Financial Times. For a long time, the debate in Japan about the Kunta women has focused on the question of state responsibility. How much did military commanders and the military as an organization know or participate in the system? In your speech, you say that it doesn't matter very much whether the women who were involved were prostitutes or whether the armed forces was organization was involved. But I think that to many people in the countries where Japanese forces have used women, it does matter. And I'd like you to clarify, if you can, your view on the degree to which Japanese forces, as in terms of commanders or organizationally, were actively involved in or aware of what was happening in the comfort women's system.
まず大前提として日本の過ちを正当化するつもりはないということをまずご理解ください。
I would like to begin with a very, very important first statement, which is that in nothing that I say, there is absolutely no attempt on my part to try to justify what was done by the former Japanese military.
これまでのこの慰安婦問題の議論は日本の責任を否定するようなそういう議論が多かったです。
I think it is true that in the past, much of the debate around the Kunta women issue has centered upon Japan's government to perhaps try to avoid taking responsibility for this issue.
我々は責任は回避できません。
I believe very strongly, however, that we cannot evade responsibility for this issue.
今ご質問いただいた点は歴史的な事実に関わることです。
In regard to your question, I believe this is something that to do with that touches upon historical facts.
日本政府がはっきりと認めているのは
What the Japanese government has clearly acknowledged
施設の管理
is that in regard to the management of these facilities,
それから戦地ですから女性を移動させること
and because these facilities were very closely located near the actual scenes of battle, the battlefields, in regard therefore to the transportation of women.
それから 民間業者に女性を集めてほしいという、その要請。
And in regard to asking or requesting of private brokers, private recruiters to gather women for these facilities,
この点には軍の一定の関与があるということは認めております。
in regard to these activities, the Japanese government has clearly stated that the military was, to a certain degree, involved in these kind of activities.
ただし、この問題の核心的な論点、
But I think the essential heart of the debate in regard to this issue,
韓国の皆さんも一番気にしている論点。
this I think is the issue that is closest to the hearts of the Republic of Korea people, the South Koreans.
そして世界の皆さんも日本特有のユニークな制度だというふうに思っている論点。
And I think actually this point goes to the heart of this issue from the eyes of the people of the world. In other words, there is this idea that Japan is unique, separate from all other nations in the world.
つまり国家の意思として組織的に女性を拉致した。
In other words, the question that lies at the heart of all of these debates is whether it was the will of the state, the will of the government, to deliberately, organizationally abduct women.
国家の意思として組織的に女性を人身売買した。
Whether it was the will of the state or the government to deliberately and organizationally not only abduct women, but engage in human trafficking of women.
この点を裏付ける証拠はありませんし、この事実について認めていないというのが日本の立場だと考えています。
In regard to this point, the stance of the Japanese government is also clear. The Japanese government has said that it has not been able to find any specific documented evidence, that proves that the will of the state was involved in abducting and trafficking women. That there is no evidence of any fact that this occurred.
ここが韓国との間の一番の革新的な論点です。
In other words, this is the heart of the debate, the difference of opinion, the difference of stances and thinking between the Japanese and South Korean governments.
そして繰り返し見解が対立している点です。
It is also the fundamental reason that our two nations have repeatedly clashed on this issue over time.
ただし、先ほども言いましたが、軍の一定の関与はあります。
Having said all of this, I would like to repeat what I've said earlier. Yes, the government was to a certain degree involved in these, the military was to a certain degree involved in these activities.
ですから、慰安婦の方にはやはりきちんとお詫びをしなければなりません。
So we must therefore apologize to the ladies who suffered, the people who are referred to as the comfort women.
Io.
Pier Emilio from Italy, Sky News. I belong to a country where has also a war history that has not come to a solution. And thank you very much for not including my country. Maybe we're not important anymore. And I would leave a history to historians. Maybe it's too early to understand really what you are too young, younger than me, to have clear-cut opinions on it. I mean, you may have opinions, but certainly you don't hold the truth. But let me take you for your own statements, because you are a lawyer, right? You wrote here in the first page, I quote your official conduct. I am committed to the dignity of women. And more important, the use of women for sexual purposes itself is a violation of their dignity. Now, let's talk about present-day Japan and Osaka, especially because our MC has said that you are the most brilliant and efficient mayor of Osaka. I don't agree with that, but this is
You can ask your question.
yes, my question is, if I'm not wrong, yesterday night, my Japanese is good but not perfect, so please confirm. I heard on Fuji television while you were debating with Mr. Nakayama, that you admitted to have been the consultant common of the Tobita syndicate of, shall we call it, the prostitution district of Osaka. Now, as far as I know, prostitution is forbidden in Japan, and Tobita is a prostitution. How do you conjugate being the mayor of Osaka and being on the common board of the syndicate of prostitution in Tobita?
すみません、質問を訳してくださいということになりました。簡単に訳させていただきますと、私はイタリア出身の記者でございます。さっき世界各国の軍がこのような行為に携わったという話の中にイタリア、私の国を入れないでくださってありがとうございます。質問でございますが、今までのそのご発言について確認したいということでございます。今、スピーチの中では、その女性の尊厳を尊重するという話もありました。そしてやはりこのようなその性的その行為というのはその女性の尊厳を犯すというような話もあったのでございますが、先日フジテレビの番組だったと思うのでございますが、中山議員との議論の中で、橋本市長は、その大阪の飛びた組合でございますでしょうか、風俗でございますでしょうか、売春ということを使っていいのかどうか分かりませんが、この組合の顧問弁護士をされたという話がありました。違法その売春という行為そのものが日本では違法ということになっているのでございますが、その大阪の市長、でありながら、このようなその顧問弁護士をされるというこの相反するようなものをどうご自分で納得されているんでございますでしょうか。そしてもう一つ、知約忘れたんでございますが、先ほどのその、紹介では司会者は、市長は大阪、で最も素晴らしい今まで最も素晴らしい市長だというふうにご紹介があったんですけど、私はちょっと意見が違います。
まず、弁護士業としてですね、顧問の関係にあること、また顧問先については、我々は守秘義務がありますので、ここで全て語るわけにいきません。
I would like to begin first of all by explaining that in the world of the legal profession, I as a lawyer, in regard are bound by confidentiality agreements as to my clients and as to the nature of the relationship I have with different parties.
まずここで言えることは、かつてはその顧問弁護士だったことは事実です。
What I can, however, say is that in regard to the organization that you mentioned, in the past I did, yes, serve as the legal advisor to this organization.
それはトヨタの組合という料理組合の顧問弁護士です。料理組合。
The organization, the association is of Toyota. This association is actually the Restaurant Owners Association, and that is the organization for which I serve as legal advisor.
日本において違法なことがあれば、捜査機関が適正に処罰します。
As you know, if there are illegal activities that are conducted in Japan, the prosecuting authorities, the investigative authorities will step in and take appropriate measures.
料理組合自体は違法でもありません。
So the restaurant organization to which I serve as a legal advisor is not an illegal organization. The end.
Next question. And please, can you limit to one question?
代表でございますが、時間の制限がありますので、一人一つの質問に限定させていただきます。
北海道新聞の西村と申します。やはりこの橋本さんの発言、沖縄の件ではですね、やはり米軍の方々、そういう目で見ているんだろうかという疑問を持ったでしょうし、また慰安婦の問題でもですね、慰安婦の方々が橋本さんに会わなかったように、やはりこの問題、過ちと言いつつ、やはり日本からはそうじゃないという声がまた出てくるという、また疑問を持ったんじゃないかと思います。外国から疑問を持たれるということ、政治的にはやはりその責任が伴うものだと思っております。日本維新の会も政党交付金という形で税金が入っているところだと思いますけれども、そういう意味で言いますと、政治責任をどう考えていらっしゃるのか、やはりこの外国に夢を招いたということで、共同代表の座を辞任するお考えがあるかどうか、あるいは逆にですね、
信を問う形で参院選に出馬すると、ご自身ですね、ということがあればあったで、被有権者が判断すると思いますが、そういうことについてどう考えているか。
I'm Nishimura from the Hokkaido newspaper. In regard to your comments, I believe that the U.S. military personnel in Okinawa heard these comments and thought that's how you look at us, and the people in Okinawa perhaps have felt the same way. I also see that the trumpet woman who had come from the Republic of Korea refused to meet with you. I think all of this is an indication that over time Japanese politicians have quite often expressed remorse and apologized for these actions, and yet they still make comments and do things that make people wonder if those apologies are truly sincere or not. In other words, as a politician, I believe that people who work as politicians have a responsibility if something that they say or do invites skepticism from other nations. In other words, to create a feeling of distrust or skepticism for the Japanese people. So, as a politician, how do you regard this responsibility? After all, the Japan Restoration Party is an official party, and as such, it must receive political funds. Is there any thinking in your mind that you might step down from this one of the representatives of this party? Or is another way of perhaps taking responsibility, deciding to run in the upper house elections that are coming up? In other words, leaving this decision up to the judgment of the voters?
民主主義の国において政治的には選挙で審判を受けることです。
As you've implied, in democratic countries, politicians are always subject to receive the judgment of the electorate through elections.
ですから私の今回の発言に対して国民がノーと言えば次の参議院選挙で維新の会は大きな敗北になるでしょう。
I think that is the way that politicians are asked to take political responsibility for their actions and words. So, if, because of the comments that I've made, the statement that I have issued, if it is the judgment of the electorate that they do not wish to support me, then I think the results will become apparent in the upper house elections. In other words, the Restoration Party will lose many of its seats.
そしてその選挙結果を受けて党内で私自身が代表のままでいられるのかどうなのか、代表のままにつかせるのかどうなのか、党内で議論が生じると思います。
And depending on the election results, I believe it is possible that there will begin to be had internal discussions within the party as to whether I should continue in my current post as one of the representatives, the heads of the Restoration Party, or whether I should not.
それが民主主義の国における政治家の責任の取り方のメカニズムだと思います。
In other words, I think this is the mechanism by which politicians take political responsibility for their actions in a democratic country such as ours.
Video.com. I'm going to start there. As a courtesy to the speaker, I will ask the question in Japanese. 日本語で質問をいたします。ビデオニュースの神保と申します。市長、先ほどのスピーチの中でですね、もし日本だけが非難される理由が戦時中国家の意思として女性を拉致した、国家の意思として自己を売買したということであるならば、それは事実と異なるというふうにおっしゃいました。で、ちょっと英語の方の翻訳を見て、それだと日本も国家がやったかもしれないけど他にもいるじゃないかと受け取れるかと心配してたんですが、後ほど市長のQ&A の中で、国家の意思としてはやっていない、しかしながら一定の、関与はあったという話をされたので、その、最初の疑問はそれで解けたんですが、そうすると、日本も一定の、インボルブメント、一定の関与があった国は日本だけじゃないじゃないかというふうにおっしゃっているように飛んでくると、つまり他の国だって政府が、国家の意思ではなくても一定の関与をしているんだから日本だけが批判されるのはおかしいじゃないかというふうにこのスピーチを受け止めるので、そういう意味でおっしゃったのかどうかお願いします。
In your speech, you mentioned that you thought one of the reasons that the primary reason that Japan was being singled out for criticism seemed to lie in the fact that there was a belief that it was in Japan, in previous wartime Japan, the will of the state to deliberately abduct and engage in human trafficking women. And you said that this was not true. And I was a little nervous as a Japanese that what you were trying to imply was that other nations in the world might have done something similar, therefore Japan shouldn't just be singled out. I was relieved, however, to hear in your question and answer session that you stated very, very clearly that there is no evidence, the government, Japanese government has not been able to obtain any evidence that the state deliberately, it was the will of the state to abduct and engage in human trafficking, but you also at the same time acknowledged that the Japanese government recognizes that there was a certain degree of involvement by the military in these activities. Now, however, I'm a little worried again because I wonder if this could be construed to mean that you're saying that other nations also have a certain degree of involvement by the military in these activities, therefore Japan shouldn't be singled out for criticism, that Japan shouldn't be alone. Just for clarity, what exactly do you mean here?
私自身が皆さんにどうしても伝えたかった論点、革新的論点に関わるご質問ですので、少し丁寧に答えさせていただきます。
Thank you for your question. Actually, your question touches upon the very heart, the essence of the message that I wish to convey to all of you. And because it is such an important point, a sensitive point, I would like to take a little time to explain it in great detail.
繰り返しになりますが、私は日本の過去の過ちを正当化するつもりは全くありません。
I do apologize for repeating myself, but I would like to state again, I have absolutely no intention of trying to justify the offenses that Japan has made in the past.
慰安婦の方々が味わった大変苦しいその経験について、我々はずっとですね、それを引き受けていかなければならないと思っています。
When we consider the tremendous suffering that is experienced by the ladies, the 100 women, I know that this is something that we must continue to always keep in our hearts. In other words, we must continue to hold on to this problem, to this issue.
ただ、この慰安婦問題に関して、不合理な議論はもう終止符を打つべきだと思っています。
Having said all of this, however, I believe that we have now reached a point in time where we should perhaps put an end to what I would call, "bugori" is the word that the mayor is using, perhaps irrational or unreasonable arguments or debates.
日本が責任を回避するようなそのような議論は決してあってはいけません。
I would like, of course, to be very, very clear. I do not think we should ever have any debates where Japan or the Japanese people try to evade taking responsibility for these matters.
このような日本の姿勢が韓国の皆さんが一番怒る原因だと思っています。
I think that it is because Japan in the past, or people in Japan in the past, have sometimes taken this kind of stance that people from the Republic of Korea have repeatedly been very angry with us.
と皆さんに問いたいのは戦場での性の問題なんです。
What I wish, however, to discuss with you today, all of the people in the room today, is the issue, the concept of sex in the battlefield.
世界各国は過去を直視していないんではないでしょうか。
I believe that each and every nation of the world probably has not really taken a hard look at its own past.
もちろん日本もそうです。
And again, I would say immediately, of course, that Japan is not an exception to this.
過去を直視しなければ未来を語ることはできません。
I believe that as human beings, unless one directly faces one's past, one confronts one's harsh and unpleasant past, you cannot think and talk about and plan for the future.
戦場の性の問題はこれまでタブー視され、これまで表立った議論は一切ありませんでした。
I believe that until now, the concept of battlefield and sex, this is something then that this has been a topic that has been considered taboo by almost everyone, and as a result, there has been very little debate and focus on this issue.
慰安婦を利用した日本は悪かったんです。
I will state unequivocally, the Japanese people who used comfort women in a sexual way that was the Japanese people who did that were bad.
しかし民間の事業者の女性を利用することはいいんでしょうか。
But I would like to ask you a further question. If it was not a government, but it was a private brothel owner or manager that committed violence against women, is that something that is alright?
アメリカやイギリスはそのフューダリズムのその考え方から政府が軍が施設を設けることはしませんでした。
The United States, the United Kingdom are nations with a Christian background, maybe Puritan background, and as a result, there was a thinking that governments, militaries, official organizations should not be involved in running such facilities.
しかし現地の女性を利用したことは歴史的な事実です。
Having said this, however, it is a hard reality and hard truth that even these nations used local women for sexual commitments.
アメリカの日本占領期間中も
Even during the period when Japan was occupied by the American forces after the war,
日本政府が作った施設をアメリカ兵士は利用していました。
there were facilities that were established by the Japanese government, which were used by American forces.
これは歴史的な事実としてしっかり証拠があります。
This also is a historical fact, and there is actual evidence, documentation that proves that this was true.
ですから私が言いたいのは軍が作ったのか民間業者だったのかそういうことは関係ないと思います。
So what I'm trying to say is that I do not believe that the heart of the problem is not whether the military was involved or whether it was a brothel or facility run by private brokers or private managers.
先ほど記者からご質問ありましたが日本の慰安所は軍が管理していたことは間違いありません。
In response to a previous question from the floor, I mentioned a few moments ago that there is no doubt that these facilities, which are called comfort stations in Japanese, there is no doubt that they were run by the government.
これはさまざまな理由がありますが、これは歴史的な歴史学者に伺いたいと思います。
It's in the newspaper, I would like to correct her choice of words because it is very sensitive issue. They were managed, come is the word that he was using, by the government.
ただ軍が管理していたこの日本の施設
But in regard to these facilities which were managed by the military,
民間業者が管理している施設も
whether they were managed, sorry, it doesn't seem to like the word managed. So actually, this is a very delicate and sensitive issue. The original word that is being used is kanbi, which can be translated as being in charge of or looking after the facility, but it can also be used as interpreted to be operate, which Mr. Sergi feels is an inappropriate word. But were managed in terms of the facilities being looked after by the military. That has been acknowledged, but whether it was the military that was involved in this or whether it was a private broker that was involved in this.
その施設の中で行われている現状は大変不幸なことがあることに変わりありません。
The point that I'm making is that whether it was managed or looked after by a military organization or by a private person or organization, the point is what happened in those facilities were things that were very tragic and full of great suffering.
またドイツも日本と同じような施設を使っていたということも事実が出てきております。
There has also been documents that prove that Germany also was engaged in having these kinds of facilities as Japan did.
朝鮮戦争時においては韓国にもそのような施設があったという事実が出てきております。
There has also been evidence to show that during the Korean War, even the Republic of Korea had similar facilities.
今このような事実について 世界は全て蓋をしています。
In regard to all of these things that I mentioned, unfortunately, the reality is that in the world today, all governments have basically put a lid on these issues. In other words, they have not decided to talk about them.
日本を非難することはもちろんこれは必要ですけれども、それで終わってはなりません。
I certainly understand and I certainly realize that there is a necessity to criticize and denounce Japan for what it has done in the past. However, I do not think that the problem should end there.
今日においても紛争地において女性の人権が蹂躙され続けております。
What I mean by this is that even in the present day, when we look at areas of regional conflict, we see that the rights of women are being trampled upon or violated.
そして軍と性の問題もタブー視され続けています。
As I said earlier, this concept, this idea of sex on the battlefield, this is something that is considered to be taboo, something that cannot be, should not be discussed.
今日においてはこのタブーを取り払い、世界でこの戦場の性の問題、軍と性の問題をしっかり議論する必要があるのではないでしょうか。
It is for these reasons that I feel that it is perhaps time now in history for us to step away from this taboo, to remove this taboo, and truly vigorously debate and discuss this issue of sex and violence.
もちろん世界がやってるから日本もいいじゃないかというつもり、それは絶対そういうつもりもありませんし、そのようなことを言ってはいけません。
Of course, I again would like to reemphasize, I am not saying, I have never said, and I do not wish to say that other countries have done similar things, therefore Japan should be excused, that it was all right for Japan to have done these things. I am not saying that this kind of thing should not be said.
私たちは悪いことをした。
We have committed wrong,
しかし皆さんも過去を直視してほしい。
but I have this earnest request. I would like everyone to look at their difficult past and also confront and face those difficult pasts.
女性の人権を守るために、紛争地において女性の人権を守るために、また軍の一部の心ない兵士によるその女性の人権蹂躙行為について、これを防ぐためにはやはり厳しく過去を直視しなければいけないと思っています。
I believe that this is the approach that we must take if we are going to try to protect the human rights of women, not only in different areas of conflict in the world today, but also in areas where a handful of heartless soldiers still violate the dignity and rights of women. The only way to correct this situation is for all of us to take a very, very harsh look at our past.
戦場において女性を利用してはいけない、これを言うことは簡単です。
Of course, it is very, very simple to simply say it is wrong to exploit or use women in the battlefield.
しかし自分たちがやったことをしっかりと直視しなければ、その対応策は出てこないと思います。
But I think until one confronts honestly all of the harsh truths of all of our past, I do not think we will be able to create a solution to somehow change this terrible situation.
戦場の性の問題は今まさに議論しなければいけない問題だと思っています。
In other words, I believe that this is a time when we must actually begin a vigorous debate about this very difficult topic, sex and battlefield. We must debate it and discuss it.
David, I will ask Mr. Hashimoto to come with short response. Is there many questions? One question.
David McNeil for The Economist. The comfort women, sorry, the Cornwall statement on the comfort women is still available on the Crown Show website. You can read it, at least for now. It says the then Japanese military was directly involved in the establishment and management of the comfort stations and the transfer of women, trafficking in other words. Given that it's up there, do you feel any need to revise or to take back that statement?
そのエコノミスト、でございます。その慰安婦問題についてでございますが、いわゆるその公務談話というその、ものが今でもその、外務省のウェブサイトに掲載されています。少なくとも今はまだ載っているということでございます。でそこからも引用させていただきますと、これは本当に必要がないのであるんですけど、これは日本政府あるいは軍の一部ですね。が直接関与してた、つまりそのこの施設の管理の移送などに直接関与してたというのを 言葉が入っているのではなく、この移送などを見ますと、これは、実際に人身売買に携わってたというふうに私は解釈するにございます。そういうことを考えますと、このその談話の文面をその修正するべきだとか、なんかそういうような考えがありますでしょうか。
この談話を否定するつもりもありませんし、ここに書かれている事実はおおむね事実であることだと僕は思っています。
I have no intention or desire to try to deny or negate the Kono statement. I believe that the contents of the statement are generally, basically, reflecting the truth.
しかし、この談話は肝心な論点については曖昧不明確にしています。
What I think, however, is problematic about the Kono Danwa is that in regard to the most important issues, the crux of the matter, the statements are very, very vague and not clear.
今、移送という女性の移送ですね、移動について軍が関与していたというご指摘がありました。
For example, you quoted part of the Kono statement where it talked about the military being involved in the transport of women.
歴史的な事実として証拠があるものは、民間業者が女性を移動させる際に軍の船を使ったということなんですね。
If we're going to be very, very precise about this, what we have found as actual recorded evidence that still exists is that some women were transported by a private broker or a private recruiter. However, they were transported in a military ship.
日本の慰安書も多くは民間業者が事業主です。
And in regard to the comfort stations during the war, the majority, for the majority of these facilities, the actual employer of the comfort women were actually private brokers or private businessmen.
ただし、その施設に軍が関与していたことも間違いありません。それは例えば一つに性病蔓延防止のために検査をやったとか、そういうことで関与していたことも間違いありません。
But it is also an undeniable fact that the military was involved in these facilities in some way. To be very specific, for example, and this is the point that Mr. Shirauchi mentioned a few moments ago to the interpreter about controversy using the word managed facility. The military was very concerned about the possible spread of sexually transmitted diseases. And as a result, quite often in these facilities, the military did conduct health checks.
戦場ですから、女性を移動する際に軍の移動手段を使ったことも事実があります。
And as I mentioned earlier, because this was a time of battle, conflict, for when women were to be transferred or transported to different places, quite often, at least in one case at least, military transports were used, and there is evidence of it.
しかし、国家が組織的に、国家の意思として組織的に女性を拉致した、人身売買したという、そういう事実はないというのが日本の多くの歴史学者の主張であり、またこの談話の後に出ました2007年の日本政府の閣議決定、日本政府の見解では国家の意思としての拉致、国家の意思としての人身売買を裏付ける証拠はなかったという日本政府の見解が出ています。
However, in regard to the concept of whether it was the will of the state to deliberately abduct women, whether it was the will of the state to deliberately engage in human trafficking of women, there is the fundamental understanding among the majority of historians in Japan is that there was no such proof of such activities. In other words, the will of the state was not involved. And even after the Kono statement was issued in 2007, there was a cabinet resolution of the Japanese government in which it again confirmed that no evidence had been found to support the idea that it was the will of the state to abduct or engage in human trafficking of these women.
韓国の皆さんが最も関心を寄せているこの革新的論点について河野談話は逃げているんです。
And as I mentioned earlier, this point, it comes to the heart of what most grieves the people of the Republic of Korea. In other words, this is the heart of the matter, and yet, as I mentioned earlier, the corner statement really does not talk at all about this point.
これが日韓関係が改善しない最大の理由だと思います。
And I believe this is the primary reason that relations between Japan and South Korea, the Republic of Korea, are not going well.
ですから私は河野談話を否定するとか修正するということではなく、明確化すべきだということを言っています。
So what I am insisting is that I do not think that the Kono statement should be revised. I do not think it should be denied or negated. What I'm saying is that the parts of it that are not clear should be clarified.
韓国の方もいろんな意見があるでしょうから、ここは日韓の歴史学者が共同で事実を明確化すべきだと思っています。
I understand, of course, that there are many opinions from persons on the South Korean side as well, and I think therefore it would be the best thing to have historians from the Republic of Korea and historians from Japan come together and together jointly try to find the truth.
韓国は日本が国家の意思として組織的に女性を拉致した、人身売買をしたという主張です。そして日本はそのような事実はなかったという主張、ここを明確化しなければなりません。
In other words, I think there needs to be a final clarity on this point. The Republic of Korea's position on this matter is that there was the will of the state involved in Japan. In other words, in Japan, it was the will of the state to deliberately and organizationally, systematically conduct abductions of women and to engage in human trafficking of women. The Japanese government has been equally clear. There was no evidence to support such an idea.
ただし、この話とは別に、慰安婦の方に対しては、しっかりとお詫びを申し上げなければいけないことは、これはもう間違いありません。
But separately from all of this, I think it is an undeniable fact that in regard, separately from the facts that I've been talking about now, the points of contention, etc., separately from all of that, I believe there is no question but that the women who served as convicted women suffered a tremendous deal, and therefore apologies do need to be extended to them.
この国家の意思として、組織的に女性を拉致した、国家の意思として組織的に人身売買をしたという点が、おそらく世界の皆さんから日本は特有だと非難される理由になっているかと思います。
The reason I'm spending so much time on this point is that it is this argument that Japan, in Japan's case, it was the will of the state to deliberately and organizationally, systematically engage in the abduction of women and the human trafficking of women. It is this point that seems, I think, in the eyes of the people of the world, to separate Japan from all of the other nations and all of the other peoples in the world. It is the area that Japan is considered to be unique and peculiar and odd and different from everyone else.
日本兵がかつて慰安婦を利用したこと、これは本当に申し訳ないことだと思いますが、事実は事実として明確化しなければいけない。事実と違うことが世界で言われているのであれば、それに対してはしっかりと違うということは言わなければいけないと思っています。
The fact that Japanese soldiers did use women for sexual purposes in the past, that is something for which I feel tremendous remorse and feel great sorrow. But facts are facts, and facts need to be clarified. The truth needs to be made clear. If facts which are different from the truth are being spread throughout the world as the actual truth, then I think we have an obligation to stand up and say that's not quite correct. In other words, we need to clarify what is the truth.
韓国の皆さんとしっかり意見交換をさせてもらいたいと思います。
I would look forward to being able to have vigorous debates with my counterparts in South Korea, the Republic of Korea, so that we can arrive at the truth.
ただ、このような話とは別にですね、どのようなその形態の差はあれ、軍の施設なのか、民間業者の施設なのか、そういうことは別として、やはり 女性を利用したということは、これは日本も含めて世界各国がきちんと過去を直視しなければいけない問題だと思っています。
But again, I would like to reiterate that separately from all of these questions about evidence and facts, I think what is important is to always remember that whether, regardless of the form that this use of women took, in other words, whether a facility was managed or operated by a private person or individual or a military or government or whatever, the fact that in the past women have been used for sexual purposes by the military, this is something that Japan and all nations of the world should face as a terrible example of what happened in the past.
We have more questions. We have yourself, after Mr. Rowley, and after yourself. And then we'll continue. So I would like to ask Hashimoto-san to provide us with shorter responses. One question.
I'm very sorry. I'm trying to answer in short ways, but they're very, very difficult questions, and I want to make sure that I get everything right.
Freelancer from Germany. When you met Mr. Ishihara, talk with him about the comfort women movement, Mr. Ishihara said Japan was wrong to apologize for the war because he says it was the US who coerced Japan into war because they didn't deliver any energy oil to Japan. So Japan had to go to war in Southeast Asia. Do you agree with Mr. Ishihara in this point?
ドイツのフリーランスのでございます。以前、石原共同代表とお会いされたかと思うんでございます、その慰安婦問題の発言について思います。でその時にその報道を見ますと、石原共同代表の方から言われたことは、日本はその戦争責任、戦争について謝ったということを、謝罪したということを、したことは間違いだったと言ったそうでございます。つまり、その米国がその日本、そのエネルギーが、送られないようにした、その石油などを送られないようにしたために、無理やりその日本をその戦争に、入らせた、戦争を始めさせたというふうに言っているそうでございますが、この、見解についてどうお考えでしょうか。
第二次世界大戦が日本の侵略戦争だったのか、また韓国への植民地政策、これはごめんなさい、韓国へこれは植民地政策だったのか、ここは日本の政治家がいろいろ議論をしていたところでもあります。
In regard to Japan's role during World War II, whether Japan was engaged in a war of aggression or invasion, whether what happened on the Korean Peninsula was colonization on the part of Japan, I know that there are many debates, many discussions still raging among politicians in Japan.
これは歴史家がいろいろ議論するところかと思います。
I believe, however, that this is a matter that should be debated, needs to be debated among historians.
国を代表する政治家は侵略であったということを認めなければいけないと思います。
I believe that as a statesman who represent the nation of Japan, I think that politician has no choice but to acknowledge that Japan was engaged in a war of aggression.
国を代表する政治家は韓国ではあれは許されない植民地政策だったというふうな認識をしなければいけません。
I think that a politician who represents the nation of Japan must speak with his South Korean counterparts. In other words, when he talks with the people of the Republic of Korea and acknowledge that what happened on the South Korean Peninsula was indeed a colonization effort by Japan government at that time.
それを否定するとなると、戦勝国側もですね、多大なる国民の兵士の命を落とした中で戦争が決着したわけですから、戦勝国もとてもじゃないですけれども、それは納得できないと思います。
And they must also acknowledge that this colonization effort is something that was unforgivable from the point of view of international standards and values. However, I think, as I said, I believe that the Japanese politicians who do represent the nation must take these stances and must think along these lines. Otherwise, we must think about how the victorious nations of the war would feel. They were able to be victorious, but at a tremendous cost. They lost many, many lives of soldiers, of people. If the defeated nations do not accept and acknowledge their responsibility, the winner, the victorious countries, probably will not be able to bear the cost of enduring.
歴史家の議論は別として、国を代表する政治家はしっかりと第二次世界大戦の責任を日本の政治家はしっかりとそれを肝に銘じて侵略と植民地政策、これはしっかりと認識しなければいけないと思います。
As I said earlier, I believe that the fundamental conclusions about the war and the final interpretations of the war, this is something that should be left up to historians, to academics. But for politicians who do represent the nation of Japan, in regard to how these politicians speak about and think about and regard World War II, I think they should definitely take the position of taking responsibility for the action of Japan in the past. In other words, they should acknowledge that it was a war of aggression, a war of colonization on Japan's part.
そして周辺諸国に多大な損害と苦痛を与えたこと、これを反省し、お詫びをしなければいけないと思います。
And I think such politicians should acknowledge that the nation was responsible for causing tremendous suffering and damage and harm to the surrounding nations, and as a result, we should apologize.
ただ、石原代表はやはりそのような考え方とは異なる考え方を持っています。
As you have suggested, Mr. Ishihara has a slightly different way of looking at this matter.
ここはその戦争時代を生きてきた、まさに生きてきたその人と、戦争が終わった後に生まれ育ってきた僕の世代の違いもあるのではないでしょうか。
I think one of the reasons for this is that there is a fundamental difference in the way that a war is viewed. If a person was actually involved in the war, had grown up during the war and experienced much of this war, or whether one belongs to a generation, a new generation, such as my generation, which was born after the war and had grown up during the post-war years.
これは敗戦国としては大変難しい問題です。
As a defeated country, this is a very, very difficult issue.
戦争当時生きていた人は国がやっていることが絶対に正しいという思いで戦争をやっていたんだと思います。
Because people who were alive during the war period were taught and believed that their country was in the right, and therefore believing that the country was very much in the absolute right, they were doing their very best to support the nation.
日本国民の多くは侵略だったことを認め反省をしていると思います。
Having said this, however, I think the vast majority of Japanese people today realize and acknowledge that this was indeed on Japan's part a war of aggression, and they feel tremendous remorse over this.
しかし1億2000万人全員が同じ考えになるというのもなかなか民主国家では難しいところがあります。
But I also believe that Japan is a democratic country after all. It's very difficult to have 120 million people feel exactly and think exactly along the same lines.
しかし皆さんに言えることは、我々の世代では過去のこの戦争の責任を蒸し返すようなことを我々の世代の政治家はやってはいけないと思います。
But I think I can very clearly and definitely say to you today that politicians of my generation should not stir up these questions about war responsibility in the future.
日本の第二次世界大戦について日本の正当性を主張するより過去のことにこだわるより未来に向けてより良いその世界を目指していくこと、こちらに力を注ぐことが我々の世代の政治家の使命だと思います。
Rather than looking to the past, looking at World War II and trying to justify what the nation has done in the past, I think it is incumbent upon politicians of my generation, future generations, to look toward the present and toward the future. In other words, we should work together to try to create a better future for ourselves.
我々の世代の政治家は過去を直視し、その評価を蒸し返すことなく、未来に向けて政治的なエネルギーを注いでいくべきだと思います。
In other words, I believe that it is important, of course, for us politicians of my generation to confront our past, to look at our past, and to understand the past, and come to terms with it, but not to try to begin discussions about responsibility, etc., but rather to take the lessons that we learned and try to use this energy that we have toward building a better future for all.
ただし、敗戦国だからといって、ありとあらゆる不当なその事実誤認について何も言わない、口を閉ざすということでもないと思っています。
Having said this, however, I know that as a defeated nation, some people might feel that we cannot speak at all. But I believe that if we understand that there are untruths or distorted truths or things, facts that are not the truth that are being disseminated, then I think we do not have to remain silent, but that we do have the right, even as a defeated nation, to speak up.
そういう意味で慰安婦問題に関して戦場の性の問題を問題提起させてもらいました。
It's for these reasons that I took the opportunity to speak about the comfort foreign issue as a way to begin a discussion about sex on the battlefield.
Mr. Hawley and Mr. Hollingcroft, and then your side. You are next. Anthony Rowley, Singapore Business Times. Mr. Mayor, on page 3 of your statement, the English version, you say you expect that the G8 summit will become an important occasion where G8 leaders will examine how soldiers from nations of the world, including the former Japanese soldiers, have used women for sexual purposes. What do you mean by an important occasion? What are you hoping the G8 can achieve in this? Are you hoping that they will instigate some sort of international investigation? Do you think the G8 can actually cast any use of light, objective light, on what's happened in this situation? In other words, for example, whether the state authority of Japan was intentionally involved, or are you hoping that somehow the G8 will be able to exonerate?
シンガポールビジネスタイムズでございます。今のその番組のその3ページ目でございますが、G8 のサミットについて期待しているという話がありました。そこで日本の旧日本軍の兵士、またはその他の国々の兵士がその女性を利用したかっていうことについていろいろ調査をさせてくれる、あるいは議論をしてくれるというようなことを書いたと思うのでございますが、具体的に何を期待していらっしゃるのでございますでしょうか。例えばその G8 の方で何かその、例えばその、旧、日本軍の行動につきまして国家の意思が何かあったかどうかというこの問題についても何か調査を始めてくれるということを、期待していらっしゃるのでございますでしょうか。例えばでございますが G8 が旧日本軍がやったことを、無実であるというようなことを出していく、そういうようなステートを出してくれるということを期待しているのでしょうか。
旧日本軍、日本軍というよりも日本がですね、日本が責任がないなんていうことはこれはありえません。
I would like to clarify, first of all, in regard to what was done by the former Japanese military, or by the former Japanese government, I am not thinking or hoping or in any way expecting that anyone will be absolved of its responsibilities.
日本の責任を認め、事実もしっかり検証した上で。
In other words, what I'm hoping is that first, acknowledging that the Japanese were also bore responsibility for various actions, and also after looking at and examining various facts.
日本の慰安処方式以外のやり方でどのように女性の人権が蹂躙されたのか、そこをしっかりと議論するべきだと思っています。
Beyond these ideas, I am hoping that more discussions will be held to examine how in what other ways women's dignity and rights have been violated in various battlefields outside of what we are talking about today. In other words, the comfort women system that we saw with Japan.
日本も過去もしっかりと直視しながら。
In other words, I believe it is, of course, and I keep repeating this over and over again, that Japan must confront its past.
世界各国もどのように女性を利用していたのか、そこの検証が必要だと思います。
I think an examination needs to be made about how other countries of the world have used women in the past as well.
それなくして戦場の性の問題、軍と性の問題は解決されないでしょう。
I say this because unless we confront all of these problems and look into all of these matters, the problem of sex in the battlefield, the military and sex issue will never be resolved.
We will give the priority to a lady.
質問の機会をくださってありがとうございます。今日来てくださってありがとうございます。先ほどのお話の中で、この慰安婦発言をめぐる一連の騒動というのは、日本メディアがあまりにも誤報が多いのか、あるいはご自身の発言はやはり誤解を招くところがあるのか、どちらかだと思うんですけれども、そこで一つお伺いしたいのですが、行動談話について、先ほど、行動談話を否定しない、そして、修正も求めない、ただ、その内容的には不明確なところがあると。この言い方は私から見れば非常に不明確だと思われますが、つまり、ご自身のこの行動談話をめぐる話は、今日のご発言を見れば、やや誤解矛盾があると思います。2012年8月24日、橋本さんはこの行動談話に関して、是正すべきだというふうに発言しています。その中で、私がお聞きしたいのは、この強制性に関してですけれども、つまり行動談話の中でですね、その軍が直接あるいは間接的に関与した、つまり軍のその強制性に関してはある程度認めています。本人の意思に反した事例も数多くあると。で、橋本さんは、この慰安婦問題に関しては、軍の強制性があったのかどうか、つまりその軍が関与したが強制性はなかった、それとも、国が関与もせず、強制性もなかったのか、どちらでしょうか。
Maybe exactly in which case I should ask for correction. Thank you very much for coming today. You mentioned, in regard to the many news reports that have come out of your comments regarding pregnant women, I think there are two reasons why there might have been so many different reports. One might have been that the Japanese media misreported your comments, or that perhaps your comments invited misinterpretation. But separately from this, you mentioned earlier in regard to the Kono statement that you would not ask for a denial or a revision of this statement, but that you pointed out that there were some elements of this statement that were not clear and needed clarification. Your comments to me lack clarity and need clarification. In other words, there is this one point which talks about the fact that in the Kono statement, there is a clear statement which says that the military had a certain degree of involvement, both directly or indirectly with this. But the crux of the matter seems to be whether the government was involved in forcing women to take part in these activities. What exactly is your position? Is there that there was some involvement, but there was no forcing of women? Can you explain this in a little bit more detail? The interpreter apologies if that question was not completely translated. If there is something missing in the answer, she will ask again.
これも革新的な論点ですね。
This also is something that goes to the heart of this debate.
河野談話について事実を変える必要性はないと思っています。に書かれている事実についてですね。
In regard to the Kono statement, I do not believe that any statement of fact inside the Kono statement, no facts that are described in there need to be revised or changed.
しかし表現についてはこれはもっと付け足さなければいけないと思っています。
But I think there need to be some changes, or not changes so much as additions in regard to how some of these ideas are explained or presented.
表現を付け足すことを修正というのか、それとも明確化というのか、これはちょっと言葉の問題かなと思います。
When I say that more words need to be added so that things can be expressed in a more clear way, now whether you will take that suggestion as being a call for revision or a call for clarification, I mean this becomes just a choice of what word you will use to describe.
まさに強制性の言葉をもっと丁寧に記述すべきだと思っています。
To be very clear, what I think is missing from the Kono statement, which I think needs to be explained more fully, is a clear explanation needs to be given about this concept of forcing women to do something.
多くの慰安婦の方が自らの意思に反して仕事をしていたのは間違いないでしょう。
In regard to the assertion by many comfort women that they were engaged in these activities and it was against their will that they were engaged in these activities, I think there is no question but that is the truth. They didn't want to be there.
これは間に民間業者も入っていましたので、そこでいろんな苦しいその状況、慰安婦の方にとっては大変辛い環境があったこと、これも間違いないでしょう。
Of course, there were in many cases brokers, private brokers that were in the middle of these activities, and I'm sure that if we look at the backgrounds of all of these different life stories, there were many tales of suffering, an environment which brought tremendous pain to many of these comfort women.
これは日本のですね、いわゆる慰安商方式以外の民間業者の施設でも同じような状況があったと思います。
What I've just described as being this environment of great suffering and special circumstances that brought women to these places, I'm talking about this in regard to the comfort women facilities that we refer to as being involved, as the Japanese military being involved in. I believe, however, that this similar kind of difficult environment was present even if the facility was run by a private broker only.
現地の戦地のですね、戦地における民間業者で働く女性も多くは意に反して自らの意思に反してですね、働いていた事情もあったかと思います。
What I'm saying is that even for these private facilities, I think the majority of women who were working there against their will, against their real desires and intentions.
ですから、法の談話ではっきりと書かれていない点、まさに日本が国家の意思として組織的に女性を拉致したのか、人身売買をしたのか、今我々が北朝鮮問題で問題提起をしていますまさに拉致問題ですね、あれと同じようなそういう状況だったのか、この点については法の談話は触れておりません。
In other words, I believe this is the matter that needs to be written out more clearly. This is what is missing from the Kono statement. Again, I come back to this most important issue, whether it was the will of the state to organizationally, systematically, deliberately abduct women and engage in human trafficking. In other words, we see now a problem that we have with the North Koreans, the DPRK, in that people have been abducted. In other words, what happened back in wartime was that a similar kind of abduction that occurred. This is something that needs to be clarified and is not in the Kono document.
ただ、このような事実がなくても、慰安婦の皆さんにはお詫びをしなければならないことは間違いありません。
But whether or not there was this kind of state involvement or not, whether these facts, regardless of how these facts turn out to actually be, there is still no change from the fundamental position that I have, that most people in Japan have, which is that the comfort women suffered and they need to be apologized to.
ただ、国家の意思として組織的に女性を拉致したのか、人身売買をしたのか、ここは日本の認識と韓国の認識、また世界の認識、ズレがありますので、事実は明確化しなければいけないと思っています。
But in regard to this state involvement, was the will of the state to deliberately, organizationally, systematically abduct women and engage in human trafficking, or whether there was no state involvement? This is a point of tremendous contention among different countries. Japan has one understanding of this issue, and the Republic of Korea has a very different understanding of this issue. And I think the rest of the world also has various views on this matter. And because there is not one unified view, I think we need to clarify this very important issue.
そのような事実があったのかなかったのか、日本政府はしっかりと言及すべきであって、そういう意味では表現を付け加えるという意味において、 これを明確化と僕は言ってるんです。
So whether there were as such facts that did exist, I mean, if there was state involvement, was will of the state, etc. I think the Japanese government must eventually issue a very clear statement about these points, and so I believe, therefore, that comments should be added to the Como statement. That's what I mean by clarifying a part of the Como statement.